The lunchtime crowd at Brewhaven Cafe moved like a restless tide. Laptops open, espresso machines hissing, indie music humming softly overhead. It was the kind of place where freelancers claimed corners for hours and influencers staged flat lays of oat milk lattes. And in the far corner by the window, beneath a hanging fern that had long since given up on life, sat a man in a gray hoodie and baseball cap. He'd been there since 8:15 a.m. No laptop, no coffee, no pastry, just sitting, watching. Cafe manager Derek Collins noticed him the way a hawk notices a mouse in tall grass. Slowly at first, then obsessively. By noon, Derek's patience was gone. He smoothed down his apron, adjusted his name tag, and marched over with the forced smile of someone who has already rehearsed the confrontation 3 times in his head. "Sir," Derek said, voice projecting just loud enough for nearby tables to tune in. "We have a policy here. Customers need to make a purchase if they're going to occupy seating." The man in the hoodie looked up calmly. His face was partially shadowed by the cap. "Oh, I see," he said quietly. A few heads turned. A woman with oversized glasses nudged her friend. Someone subtly lowered their phone to record. Derek folded his arms. "You've been here for over 3 hours. This isn't a public lounge." The man nodded slowly. "I understand. So I'm going to have to ask you to either order something or free up the table." The man glanced around the cafe, the buzzing room, the whispering customers, the barista pretending not to listen. Then he reached into his pocket. Derek braced himself. Instead of a wallet, the man pulled out a small notebook and pen. He scribbled something. Then he looked up again. "You ever have a bad day, Derek?" The manager blinked. "I am sorry." "A bad day," the man repeated. "The kind where you just need a quiet corner." Derek stiffened. "Sir, this isn't about your day. This is about business." The man studied him for a long moment. Then he slowly removed his cap. The room inhaled collectively. Derek's brain tried to process what his eyes were seeing. The jawline, the smile, the unmistakable presence. Will Smith. There was a full 2 seconds where time seemed to glitch. One barista dropped a ceramic mug. A teenager at the back whispered, "No way." Derek's face drained of color. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." Will raised a hand gently. "Realize what?" Derek swallowed. "That it was you. And if it wasn't?" Will asked softly. Silence. The cafe suddenly felt smaller. Derek's confidence deflated like a balloon meeting a needle. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Mr. Smith. It's just our policy." Will leaned back in the chair, relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. "Policy's important. I respect that. But tone? That's important too." He looked around at the customers. "You see, everybody in here heard how you approached me. You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't ask if I needed anything. You assumed." Derek opened his mouth, closed it again. Will stood up slowly. He wasn't towering, but his presence filled the room. "Let me ask you something," Will continued. "If I was just some regular guy in a hoodie, maybe down on my luck, maybe waiting for a job interview, maybe just trying to warm up for a bit, would you have handled that the same way?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "We get people who try to loiter all the time. It's my responsibility to protect the business. And I respect that," Will nodded. "But protecting your business doesn't mean embarrassing somebody." The room was quiet enough to hear the espresso machine gurgle in the back. A young woman near the counter spoke up timidly. "He's right." Derek glanced around. The public tide had shifted. Will smiled gently, but there was weight in it. "You know, I came here because I'm in town filming. Didn't want the hotel noise. Just needed to think. I was planning to order something in a bit." He gestured to the room. But this became a moment. Derek ran a hand over his face. I apologize." Will studied him carefully. "Do you?" "Yes," Derek said quickly. "I shouldn't have. I mean, I could have approached it differently." Will nodded slowly. "Let me tell you a story," he said, settling back into his chair. "First time I came to LA, I walked into a fancy restaurant on Sunset. I didn't look like much. Guy at the door sized me up and said they were booked. 10 minutes later, a producer walked in behind me, and they rolled out the red carpet." He paused. "I never forgot that feeling." The cafe hung on every word. It wasn't about the food. It was about being judged before I opened my mouth. Derek's shoulders sagged. That wasn't my intention. I believe you, Will said gently. Intent and impact are two different things. A man at a nearby table clapped quietly. We'll turn back to Derek. Here's the thing. Leadership isn't about catching rule breakers. It's about setting a tone. Your staff is watching how you treat people. The baristas absolutely were. Derek looked over at them. They quickly busied themselves. I get stressed, Derek admitted. Corporate sends mystery shoppers. Sales targets. We've had issues with people camping out all day. Will nodded. Pressure's real. I'm not minimizing that. But stress is when your character gets tested. There it was. The line hung in the air like punctuation. Derek took a deep breath. You're right. Will smiled faintly. That's growth talking. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out his wallet. Now, let's fix the original problem. I'll take a large coffee. Black. Derek blinked. On the house. Will tilted his head. No, I'll pay. But, because the point isn't special treatment. The point is equal treatment. The room murmured approval. As Derek rang up the coffee himself, hands slightly shaky, a teenager approached Will hesitantly. Mr. Smith? Can I get a picture? Will grinned. Only if Derek's in it too. Derek froze. The room laughed. Minutes later, a photo was snapped, Will with his arm around Derek's shoulder, both smiling, though Derek's was still recovering from shock. But the moment wasn't over. Will turned back to Derek before heading to the counter. Can I give you one more piece of advice? Please, Derek said earnestly. Next time someone sits quietly for hours, try this. Hey, just checking in. Can I get you anything today? He paused. Same policy. Different energy. Derek nodded slowly, absorbing it. The cafe's atmosphere had completely shifted from tense curiosity to warm reflection. Will took his coffee and moved back to his corner table. This time, nobody saw a loiterer. They saw a man thinking. And Derek? He stood behind the counter, replaying the entire exchange in his head. About 30 minutes later, an elderly man shuffled in, coat worn thin, eyes scanning nervously for a place to sit. Derek watched. Old instincts tugged at him, but then he remembered the moment. He stepped out from behind the counter, softer this time. Hey there, Derek said kindly. Welcome in. It's chilly out. Can I get you something warm? The man hesitated. I don't have much. Derek glanced at Will across the room. Will didn't look up, but somehow, Derek felt like he was being tested again. He turned back to the man. That's okay, Derek said gently. Let's figure something out. Behind him, one of the baristas quietly started making a small coffee. No announcement, no spectacle, just quiet humanity. Will took a sip of his coffee, watching the reflection in the window. A small smile crept onto his face. He didn't need to say anything else. The lesson had landed. An hour later, as Will prepared to leave, Derek approached once more. I meant what I said, Derek began. Thank you. That could have gone very differently. Will slid his cap back on. Yeah, it could have. Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Will chuckled. Because it shouldn't matter. He headed toward the door. Right before stepping out, he turned. Character shows up when nobody famous is watching. And then he was gone. The cafe buzz resumed, but something had shifted permanently. Derek looked around at his staff. New rule, he said quietly. We lead with kindness. The baristas nodded. Outside, Will walk down the street, hoodie back up, blending into the city again. Not as a superstar, just as a man who had turned a small public embarrassment into a quiet masterclass. And inside Brewhaven Cafe, no one would ever look at a loitering customer the same way again. Outside, the afternoon air had turned sharp and golden, that in-between hour where the sun starts slipping, but the city hasn't admitted it yet. Will didn't rush. He never rushed. He walked half a block before stopping at the corner, pretending to check his phone while really watching the cafe through the reflection in a storefront window. Inside, Derek was moving differently. Less stiff, less territorial, more aware. Will smiled faintly and slid the phone back into his pocket. He wasn't there by accident, and he definitely wasn't just killing time. Back inside Brewhaven, the energy had changed, but the ripple hadn't fully settled. People were still whispering. A woman near the register leaned toward her friend. Did that really just happen? Her friend nodded. That man just turned a coffee shop into a TED Talk. Derek overheard it. He felt exposed, but not in a humiliating way. In a clarifying way. He stepped in the back office and closed the door. His reflection stared back at him in the small security monitor screen. 3 hours ago, he would have sworn he was just doing his job. Now, he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed. Corporate. He stared at the screen. Let ring. For once. Out front, the elderly man had indirectly advocated for was seated comfortably now, hands wrapped around a warm cup. One of the baristas, Mia, crouched beside him. You can stay as long as you need, she said quietly. The man's eyes glistened. That's very kind. Derek watched through the small office window. Something inside him shifted again. Not guilt. Responsibility. He stepped back out onto the floor. Team meeting, he said calmly. The staff exchanged looks. Customers leaned subtly closer. Derek cleared his throat. I handled that wrong earlier. A beat. I enforced policy, but I forgot empathy. The room was listening. Going forward, we don't just protect the business. We protect dignity. Mia nodded slowly. The younger barista, Jordan, raised an eyebrow. So what does that mean exactly? It means, Derek said, thinking carefully, we check in before we check out. We assume humanity before we assume intention. Jordan blinked. That's actually solid. Derek exhaled. And that's when the glass door chimed again. A tall man in a dark jacket stepped in, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Not a customer. Security. He spotted Derek immediately. Mr. Collins? Derek straightened. Yes. The man lowered his voice. We've received calls about a celebrity sighting here. Crowd control might become an issue. Derek's stomach tightened. He glanced outside instinctively. What was gone? I think the moment's passed, Derek said. The security officer scanned the cafe once more before nodding slowly. If it picks up, call us. As he left, customers started buzzing louder. Phones were out now. Someone had already uploaded a video. Jordan checked his screen. Oh, wow. What? Mia asked. Jordan turned the phone around. A clip, Derek confronting the hoodie-wearing man, had already hit social media. Title: Cafe Manager learns a lesson from Will Smith. Views were climbing fast. Derek's pulse quickened. How many? Mia asked. 27,000. In how long? 10 minutes. Derek's mouth went dry. He watched the numbers tick upward in real time. 42,000. 61,000. The comments started flooding in. Some supportive. Some brutal. Typical power trip. Embarrassing. He handled that badly. Derek swallowed hard. This was the part nobody prepares you for. Not the confrontation. The aftermath. His phone buzzed again. Corporate. This time he answered. Derek. The regional director's voice came sharp and clipped. What happened today? Derek inhaled slowly. I made a mistake. A pause on the other end. That video is everywhere. I know. Another pause. We'll need a statement. Derek looked around the cafe. At his staff. At the elderly man warming his hands. At customers who were still lingering. Not because they had to, but because something meaningful had happened here. No, Derek said quietly. What do you mean, no? I won't issue a defensive statement. Silence. I handled it wrong. I'm fixing it. The director sounded caught off guard. Derek, will follow character, Derek said, surprising even himself. He ended the call. Mia stared at him. You okay? He nodded slowly. For the first time today? Yeah. The door chimed again. A teenager rushed in, breathless. Is he still here? Jordan shook his head. You just missed him. The teen groaned dramatically. But then his expression softened as he looked around. Honestly, that was kind of cool. Derek blinked. What was? That he didn't flex. He could have roasted you. Derek huffed a weak laugh. Yeah, he could have. The teen shrugged. But he didn't. That's the part people are sharing. Jordan refreshed the video. 120,000 views. But something interesting was happening in the comments. The tone was shifting. People were quoting Derek's new line. We assume humanity before intention. Okay, but that manager low-key redeemed himself. Growth in real time. Derek stared at the screen. Redemption wasn't loud. It was incremental. Outside, a black SUV slowed briefly at the curb half a block down. Inside, Will sat quietly. Beside him was a woman reviewing something on a tablet. Clips trending, she said. Will nodded. I know. She glanced at him. You didn't plan that, did you? Will looked out the window. No, he said thoughtfully. But I don't waste moments. She smiled faintly. You changed that place. Will shook his head. No, he did. Back inside Brew Haven, the afternoon rush hit. Only it didn't feel like a rush. It felt intentional. Derek approached a man who had been sitting alone for over an hour, staring blankly at the wall. Old instinct would have tightened his posture. Instead, hey, Derek said gently. Just checking in. Can I get you anything? The man blinked, almost startled by the kindness. Actually, I think I need a refill. On me, Derek replied with a small smile. No spectacle. No announcement. Just different energy. By evening, the video had crossed 500,000 views. A news outlet requested a comment. Derek declined. Not because he was hiding, because he was busy practicing. As closing time approached, Mia flipped the sign to closed. The elderly man stood slowly, adjusting his worn coat. Thank you, he said quietly to Derek. Derek nodded. Come by any time. The man hesitated. You know, not everyone learns in public. Derek absorbed that. Guess I did. The man smiled softly and left. Jordan locked the door. Wild day, he muttered. Derek leaned against the counter. Yeah. Mia studied him. You think he'll come back? Derek thought about it. Will blending into corners. Watching. Testing. Doesn't matter, Derek said. Why? Because we'll treat the next person right whether he does or not. The staff exchanged looks. That wasn't the Derek they'd known last week. Outside, night settled fully. Streetlights flickered on. Inside, Derek wiped down the final table, the corner one beneath the hanging fern. He paused, ran a hand over the surface. Earlier that day, he'd seen a loiterer there. Now, he saw a mirror, a reminder. He turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool air. Across the street, leaning casually against a brick wall, stood a familiar figure in a hoodie. Derek froze. Will pushed off the wall and walked toward him. No cameras. No crowd. Just two men in the quiet. Evening, Will said. Derek let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. You came back. Will shrugged. Had to see the ending. And, Will studied him carefully. You didn't defend yourself online. Derek shook his head. Didn't need to. Good. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. You know, Derek said cautiously, why were you really here? Will smiled faintly. I'm working on something. A movie, something like that. Derek raised an eyebrow. What's it about? Will slipped his hands into his pockets. Moments. Derek frowned slightly. Moments. The small ones, Will clarified. The ones that reveal who we are. A slow understanding dawned on Derek. Was today part of it? Will didn't answer directly. Instead, tell me something, he said. If I hadn't taken off the cap, would you still have changed? The question landed heavy. Derek thought about it honestly. I like to say yes, he admitted. But I don't know. Will nodded. That's the work. He started stepping backward. Keep doing it. Doing what? The checking in. And just like that, he turned and walked into the night. No SUV this time. No spotlight. Just a man disappearing into the ordinary. Derek stood there a long while. Then he pulled out his phone, opened the trending video, scrolled past the comments, past the noise, and typed one sentence. I'm learning. He hit post. Not as a defense. Not as a brand move. Just as truth. Across town, Will's phone buzzed. He read the sentence, smiled, and whispered to himself. That's the sequel.